In December 1914, on a frozen battlefield in Europe, two enemy armies did something their generals never ordered and never forgave. They stopped fighting on their own. No treaty, no command from above, just thousands of ordinary men who, for one night, decided that the enemy across the mud wasn't really their enemy at all. This is the Christmas Truce of 1914, the day the First World War paused itself. How did it begin? And why were the generals so frightened of it that they made sure it could never happen again? To understand how impossible this was, you have to see where these men were standing. The First World War had begun only 5 months earlier, in the summer of 1914. Everyone promised it would be over by Christmas. They were wrong by 4 years. By December, the fighting on the Western Front, the long scar of battle running through Belgium and France, had hardened into something new: trenches. Long, muddy ditches carved into the ground where men lived, slept, and died. Between the two sides lay a strip of torn earth with a name: No Man's Land. In places, it was a few hundred meters across. In others, close enough to hear the enemy cough, close enough to throw a stone. It was bitterly cold. Men stood in water up to their knees, and across that narrow gap, two groups of young men, British and German, waited to kill each other. Most of them barely understood why. Then came Christmas Eve, December 24th, 1914. On the German side, something small began. The soldiers started setting little fir trees, tiny Christmas trees, along the very lip of their trenches, and they lit candles on them. Picture that, in the middle of a war, tiny points of warm light flickering in the dark, all along the enemy line. Then the British heard it, singing. Soft at first, drifting across the mud from the German trenches. Stille Nacht. You know it by another name: Silent Night. And here's a small thing I love. That carol they were singing, in a war zone, it was already almost 100 years old. Written in a quiet Austrian village back in 1818. A gentle little lullaby, somehow finding its way to the worst place on earth. The British listened, and then they sang back. One side would finish a carol, the other would answer. Two enemy armies in the dark, taking turns to sing. And not one shot was fired. When the sun rose on Christmas morning, the truce stepped out of the dark and became real. A few men climbed up out of their trenches, no weapons, hands open and empty, walking slowly into no man's land, the most dangerous ground in the world, to meet the enemy. And the enemy walked out to meet them. No one fired. And then came the detail that made the whole thing impossible to undo. They started to talk, and they understood each other. Because many of the German soldiers had lived and worked in Britain before the war. Waiters in London hotels, barbers, cooks. Some called out across no man's land in perfect English, asking about streets and shops they used to know. Sit with that for a second. The enemy had been pouring coffee for these men in London a year earlier. They weren't monsters. They were homesick young men in different coats. So they shook hands. They traded gifts: cigarettes, chocolate, buttons cut straight from their coats. The Germans shared sausage. The British shared their Christmas pudding. They passed around photographs of home, wives, children, mothers. Men from units like the Scots Guards and the Royal Welsh Fusiliers wrote home about it, almost unable to believe their own words. But the most powerful moment of that day wasn't the gifts or the singing. It was quieter than that. Out in no man's land, bodies had been lying for weeks. Men killed in the fighting, too dangerous to reach. On this one morning, both sides walked out together and buried them. Enemies standing over the same graves, reading prayers for each other's dead, helping the men who had been shooting at them lay their friends to rest. For a few hours, the war simply forgot to happen. And then, somewhere along that same frozen line, something almost unbelievable happened. A ball appeared. Football! Right there, in no man's land, between the trenches! Now, I want to be honest with you because the truth matters here. This wasn't a tidy match with 2 teams, a referee, and a final score. From the soldiers' own letters, it sounds more like a kickabout, a scramble in the mud, coats thrown down for goalposts, men slipping, falling, and laughing. But sit with what that actually means. Men who the day before had been trying to kill each other were now chasing a ball through the snow. Together. A few accounts even swear the Germans were winning. By some estimates, as many as 100,000 men took part in these truces, up and down the line. But not everywhere. In some places, the killing never paused for a second, and the truce was never going to be allowed to last. Because far behind the lines, the generals were furious. Making friends with the enemy is dangerous in a war. It is very hard to shoot a man after you've shaken his hand and seen the photo of his children. So the orders came down. One British commander, General Smith Dorrien, forbade any friendly contact with the enemy at all. And the next Christmas, in 1915, commanders ordered their guns to keep firing through the night, just to guarantee it could never happen again. And the war itself changed. It grew bigger, crueler. Poison gas, endless shelling, rising mountains of the dead. As the years dragged on, that urge to climb out and shake the enemy's hand simply died. The Christmas Truce of 1914 never truly happened again. It stayed exactly what it was, a single, fragile moment, one crack of light in 4 long years of darkness. But it happened. That's the part I can't get past. For one day, ordinary men looked across the mud, saw another human being instead of an enemy, and chose peace. Nobody ordered them to. They just did. The British remembered it. The Germans remembered it. And more than 100 years later, we're still telling the story. Because deep down, we want it to be true. We want to believe that even in the worst of times, people can still choose to be kind. I'm Mr. Lore. This is Mr. Lore Files, the stories behind everything. Because here's the thing, almost everything around you, the stuff you walk past every day without a second look, is hiding a story just as strange as this one. And next time, we're going to pick one up and look underneath. Subscribe, and let's keep digging.